Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is about funding research travel. Hey, if you're new here, welcome to our little academic channel on YouTube. If you're a returning subscriber, it's lovely to have you back. My name is Caroline. I'm a senior lecturer here in the UK, and I teach and I research and I work within physics. Now, it's come up in the comments about how we fund travel as academics. And so I thought what I could do in this video is I'll share a little bit about how my research group is funding our current conference travel. So I guess first up then a little bit about my kind of research group, if you like. So I would be considered the PI, the principal investigator. And then within my group of researchers, I've got a postdoctoral researcher. I've got several PhD students, then students doing their master's projects, both the Master of Physics and the Master of Science, and they're different types of degree programme. And then, of course, undergraduate bachelor students in their projects as well, and summer internships. So the makeup of my group has a mix of us from all these kind of different areas. And within this, there is a requirement, really, if you like, to go out and to share our research on conferences. So international conference events and those more closely based to home. And so, of course, that is going to require money. And so that brings a good question. How do we fund ourselves going to these events? So if I look across then my kind of group, if you like, so when I wrote the application to award a postdoc, so I approached a funding agency and I wrote an application to be awarded a postdoc position. Within that application, I wrote for a certain amount of money to be awarded to support travel. And importantly, I wrote for that money to support the travel of the postdoc who would take the position, and also of a summer student who would potentially work with us as well on that project, and critically also to support my travel. Because when you're the PI of a project, you need to make sure that you're writing yourself into these research grants so that you too have got travel money so you can go alongside your research colleagues, your students, to see them and hear them present. So that's the first thing I did, is if I'm writing a research grant application, and this one was for a postdoc position, I make sure that I write in funding lines to cover the postdoc's research and also travel for myself, travel for the postdoc, and travel for any other students working within that grant. But typically that's not going to be enough money to support the conferences that you might want to go to. So then what do you do next? So the trick, and at least within the sciences, the trick seems to be to have enough money so that you can do something called matched funding. Now, this is where we've got funding, but we haven't got enough to support us to go to the particular conferences. So we then approach other funding agencies, other research calls, and say, hey, look, we've got like half the money. Could you give us the other half of the money to go to the conference? So what my postdoc did was he was looking to go to an international conference later this year. So he applied for the scholarship funding, which would cover the registration fee to go to that conference. And he also applied for the travel funding. So the conference offered support for researchers earlier in their career to have travel funding to go to the event. So he applied for both the registration funding and the travel funding, and he was very successful. He got both those pots of money. Now, in part, he got both those pots of money because he is presenting at the conference. So I think it really helps sometimes when you're applying for these buckets of money to get you to events. If you're having an active role at the event, it can help kind of like claim your cause to being awarded that money. And actually he applied to different funders. So he applied to the conference directly for the travel money and for the registration funding. And we also applied to a separate funder for the travel funding as well. And that means we can now piece those buckets of money together, and that allows him to have enough money to attend the event. And in doing so, we're only using a small amount of money off that initial grant application that I wrote, because he's able to use that small amount of money to then springboard and earn himself, if you like, other money from other funders to pay for his tickets to go to the event. And that's really important because it means then there's still some money left in that original travel, in that original research application, which we can then use for other students, other researchers to do similar things. So my master student has done something very similar. they've applied directly to the conference they're going to. They are intending to present at that conference. They too have been awarded travel funding, but only up to 80% of their actual ticket will be covered by the funding body they've applied to, which means they also need to kind of reach back into my initial application that I wrote and was awarded and take 20% of the funding off our original application, couple it together with 80% of the funding they've been awarded, and now they've got enough money to travel. So what we're basically doing, it's like a jigsaw. I'm not sure I'm explaining it that well, but I write an application and I try to win some significant funding. And within that funding, I make sure there's an allowance for travel, and it's named both for the person who's doing the research, for myself, and for any students who are connected with that research. We then use that awarded bucket of money to then apply to other funders to say, hey, we've got some money now, but we haven't got quite enough to do all these conferences that we want to do. If you can supply us 50% or 80%, we then partner it back up with 20% from that original grant that I secured, and then we have enough money to travel. So it's quite like, it's a constant, not battle's the wrong word, but it's a constant effort going, okay, which students have I got? Which buckets of money are they applying for? Are they applying directly to their sponsor? Are they applying for funding maybe to the conference itself directly? And then how are we going to tie that with any funding that we've already been awarded for that research work in order to maximise the amount of appropriate travel we can take? And it's something that's, I think, really key as well when you're earlier in your kind of career stages. So you'll often find that conferences will have funding to support people who are doing a PhD, to support undergraduates travelling to that event, to support people who've just got their PhD and into their first postdoc. They're like the buckets of money usually that you can apply against. So as somebody like myself, a mid-career researcher, often I can't access those pots of money because I am considered to be too far into my research career. So I need to rely on getting funding when I put together my research grant applications. And that's why it's so critical that I make sure that I write in funding for myself to travel. And at the same time, I need to encourage my students and support them because they're the ones who are able to apply for these additional allocations of funding from these different organisations that we can then partner up to make sure that everybody gets their conference travel. I hope I haven't made that sound really, really complicated. It is something that's really important if you are like the research lead or the principal investigator. Something I'm very aware of is making sure that we have the right money against the right cost codes to let people go to the right events. And in doing this, we've got people going to international conferences. We've been able to have summer students go to conferences, master students go to conferences. It's totally doable and it's totally achievable. You just have to kind of watch where you're kind of spinning the plates of the money, if you like. And I think it's one of those roles of academia that's really hidden. I don't think people really think about us academics, us doing this. But it's not like the university says, hey, at the start of the year, here's, X £1,000 to go travelling for the rest of the year. That's not how it works. As the researcher heading up the research, it's kind of like your responsibility, your accountability, if you like, to make sure that when you're winning these research grants, pots of money, you're putting in your travel provision in order to allow you to attend these conferences. And I guess that's also then why it's so frustrating when you don't win the research grants, and for many, many applications that you put in, you just won't be successful. It's such a competitive space at the moment to try to win research funding. And if you're relying on that research funding to be awarded to go to an event, it can be so frustrating when you don't get the research grant, because then it also impacts your travel. These days, more conferences are putting things online. It's not the same as being there. I think if you're at a conference, that the networking is better. It's easier to make those kind of social contacts that might develop into a collaboration. I think it is harder to do this kind of networking when we're in the virtual space online. But I do understand that in the virtual space, it can be easier if you've got caring commitments or you've got traveling difficulties. Actually, being online is a great option in those circumstances. And also being online and doing the online offering at a conference is usually much cheaper. So if we're at a stage where we can't physically get to a conference, sometimes registering and attending the online program is a really good second option. But that's a bit how it works. So, I'm constantly looking across the portfolio of research within my group, and I'm constantly trying to make sure that everybody has got sufficient funds to go to the events they want to. And equally, working with the researchers to help them prioritize which events to go to. We cannot go to everything. It would just cost way too much money to be hopping on planes and going left, right, and centre everywhere. So we have to strategically prioritize where we send researchers, who's representing whose research at which event, where does it work for the PhDs to go, at what points do they actually have research they want to showcase. Sometimes we have undergraduates working on projects and we put their research into posters or to talks. We're doing this summer, but they don't actually attend the event. It's either the PhD or the postdoc who attends and presents on behalf of the group. Sometimes we've got the funds to be able to let the PhD and the BSc and the master students travel. And this year we've been able to secure that. So some of my master students and some internship students are off to conferences in this way. But it is a constant juggling act. And I would love to know, how do you deal with it? How do you cope? How do you make sure that all the researchers in your area, if you like, have funding? How do you make sure that you have enough funding to attend these conferences and these travel? Maybe your university gives you a nice big bucket of money at the start of the year and you're all sorted. Or maybe you're more like me, having to piecemeal it all together. However you do it, however you fund your travel, let me know in the comments. I love reading about how we're different and similar across the academic space. Thanks to all of you who joined my ramblings about the car in our last YouTube Live. I hope things are continuing to go well for you across the summer. I hope you're managing to find time to take a break. I'll be back on YouTube in a couple of weeks' time. And of course, the next live is coming up on the 15th of August. But in the meantime, have a lovely week and I will see you soon. Bye.